Hi guys. Hopefully, quick introduction. Now, I do this because it grounds us, it anchors us, and it hopefully is creating the bigger kind of narrative through your head of why we're doing what we're doing. So we are working on all the skills needed to do an amazing question 4, which is always in every exam they've ever set, an opinion article to write an article. So we are working to best meet the criteria to get as many of those 30 marks as possible. AO2 gives you 20 marks, AO5 gives you 10. Now, those 10 marks come for creative use of English to communicate. So this is all the area that we've been focused on. Okay, how are we going to get 10 out of 10 in terms of being creative journalists, communicators of language in such a way that a good journalist would do? And we have been on that journey by beginning to adopt the style and form of the article. So really teaching and practicing the skills of putting together an article, and in a really kind of broken down, structured way. Okay, so we have looked at introducing you to what these variety of pegs are, and we have begun the journey of creating stand firsts, headlines, and opening sections. Okay, we work together live to start to think about creating pegs, and we talked about courtroom peg. So this is, if you did look at the recorded lesson that was online to go with the live lesson, although so many of you came, it was wonderful. These are some of the preamble ideas I'd come up with. So we talked about needing a tenor, and our tenor is going to be accents and speech. So what do people think about accents and speech? What do I think? And we need the peg being the arresting kind of extended metaphor. So we started as a group, didn't we, with courtroom. And we've got courtroom, dock, trial, judge, defense, prosecution, witness, guilty, innocent, evidence, jury, conviction, sentence, punishment, release. A whole bank of what we call words that link to the ground, okay, of being in a courtroom. Now, what a metaphor does is it says, well, what's the common ground? How can we create a link between the common ground of the vehicle, the imaginative idea, the courtroom idea, and the tenor, the actual idea itself, accents and speech? So then we began to play with some ideas, and these were some I'd come up with pretending in the recording of the original lesson that we were talking to each other. So I've come up with things like accent and speech in the dock. Accents have been wrongfully convicted of a crime for too long. Accents have been aligned with a wrong idea about social class and background. Accents in the dock, accents on trial. The defense may argue that all accents are valid, equal. We could use language like in the defense of accents, that there's a sense of pride in how we speak and of where you're from. Accents can positively signify who you are. We might have to consider the other side. So in terms of prosecution, they might make the case that all accents aren't equal, that RP is the privileged, powerful accent that we should all use, that they will advocate for that. So we use the little image to create the metaphors. Now, these were some that I had looked at or talked you through in the recorded lesson. So really quickly, you can see that we've got a web, mustn't pause, mustn't hesitate. I was thinking of words like spin, a web is spun, it can ensnare, it can trap, but at the same time, a web is something really unique and individual. They're a natural phenomenon, the web, but they're sticky. And that's what I can remember. That's how the little insects get stuck in there. You get cobwebs. They're hard to get out of. I was thinking just now, this is totally new. I was just reminded, poor old the Hobbit, Frodo Baggins. He gets caught in the spider's web of that big scary spider that Shelob, living in the caves. And so we know that these webs can be spun and set like a trap. Aragog from Harry Potter. Okay, so therefore, how do we then look for the common ground between those seemingly separate ideas? Because that's all to do with web. What's that got to do with speech and accent? Here we go. So some people, attitudes towards speech are a tangled web of wrong ideas that trap us into thinking that some accents and ways of speaking are better than others. Breaking these patterns of thinking can be hard, like a small fly trying to escape the sticky web. It often takes another to break the web and free the thought. So that was actually more of like trying to model for you there how to take these extended metaphors into a paragraph. Now, the other two on here now, for these in the recorded lesson, you'll see I didn't link them particularly to accents and speech, but I did the download, mustn't pause, mustn't hesitate. So we've got sight, perception, blindness, ignorance, clarity. We can talk positively about 20/20 vision or negatively about having double vision. We can talk about people having cataracts. Cataracts is a natural kind of deterioration of sight caused by a film covering the eye that can be very easily removed. We can talk about, hello, glasses, eye tests, the opticians being long-sighted, short-sighted. So if we were going to use that metaphor in relation to accents to speech, we could start to say things like, okay, some people's understanding of accents and dialects, has led to a short-sighted understanding of what it means to value who you are and how you speak. It is time to deal with the short-sighted attitude that says RP and modified RP is the best way to speak. It is time to deal with the blindness and ignorance of people who still see and judge people based on the way they speak. So we're playing them with that extended metaphor of sight. Then we've got the little cute chameleon down there. So he's an animal, an amphibian reptile that adapts its skin and outward appearance in order to blend into its environment. It's an evolutionary development. It's protective. It guards us against being eaten. It's a natural defense. So we could use that in terms of accents and speech. Over time, people have become like chameleons. Just as the animal adapts its skin and outward appearance in order to blend into its environment, so a popular belief has emerged that by changing and adapting your speech and appearance, you may get ahead in the workplace or in society in general. Some people would have you believe that this is a perfectly natural evolutionary development and that there's nothing wrong with adapting the way you speak to your environment. But, because remember, I think all accents are equally valid. I think all accents are really important, but we are not animals, but human beings pride themselves on having developed a sense of reasoning and identity that separates them from the animals. And there are times when the animal kingdom does not best serve to explain what we're doing and why. Changing the way you speak to fit in with your environment might seem like a convenient, natural explanation for what people are doing, but really it belies an ingrained prejudice and external pressure put on people that tells them if they do not change, something bad will happen. Oh, see, I was getting a bit more Katie Edwards there, a bit more forceful. So can you see how we begin to use the ground, the bank of ideas to thread into an article? So you can see here now, I might save some of these for when we're back together live next lesson, but we have sickness, we have a garden and growing a plant, we have mythology, and we have a disguise. So I did challenge you, I think in the live lesson maybe, but also in the video of last lesson, to think about the ground, the areas that I'm creating word banks for each of these accents and speech. But I'm going to wait until we're live together to get some feedback on those. And what I just want to look at today with you, okay, is this other way of creating a peg. And actually what I'm going to do is just talk you through an example, but then actually release you from listening to me for too long today to actually practice some of these types of pegs today. And I'm also going to give you a little bit of a research task to help you with the other peg areas. Okay, so when we talk about the anecdote, so extended metaphor is a really common way to create a journalistic peg, as is the anecdote. And we know that from Katie Edwards. We've got two anecdotal Katie Edwards articles, one that we've looked at in detail that you analyze for your homework, the other that I've just kind of fed in little tidbits of as we've gone through. But she is clearly anecdotal. But what I just want to draw attention to is different ways of being anecdotal. Now we can offer a domestic anecdote. Okay, so here's a domestic anecdote for you. I am sat in my kitchen. Domestic anecdote. I'm beginning to tell you a story about my private home life. So when we talk about domestic anecdotes, it's home life. Now, this is one of the easiest ways to get an anecdote, to plan to use an anecdote when you're when you're anxious about being creative. Yesterday morning, I was sat in my kitchen listening to the radio. Yesterday evening, I was sat in my kitchen scrolling through Twitter and social media when Katie Edwards popped up with yet again another controversial tweet. But I had to admit she had some validity in her argument. So I've just literally taken, and I'll go through the others and I'll explain. So that's domestic anecdote. It's telling a story about your personal life, okay, your home life, your personal experience. Domestic anecdote. Sat next to me is my cat Oscar. Is that true? Or am I just making up a personal anecdote? It's true. So personal anecdotes. Now, domestic anecdotes, home life anecdotes. Now, these could be good. Now, we know Katie Edwards was writing in the Telegraph in the female section. She is a very strongly kind of, her identity is very strong, and her identity is a healthy mix of her job, her professional identity, but also her personal identity. So she does bring to the articles we've read both the domestic and the professional kind of anecdote. So all we mean by anecdote is set up where you are within your domestic life. Yesterday, I was talking with my children. Last night, I was on the phone with my mother. Okay, we could modernize it. Yesterday, I was on yet another Zoom call. I was on yet another Zoom party call with my friends for my son's birthday. Yesterday, I was. So when we talk about domestic anecdote, it's creating a sentence. Here we've got last month, I attended an international academic conference. Your domestic anecdote could be, yesterday, I was sat at my kitchen table. Now, what you're going to do, and I did mean to, I've gone too far ahead. Okay, so your job today is for each of these is just to create the opening line of the anecdote. If you get into the swing of it, i.e. you like the flow of it and you want to make your line a little bit longer, so we're just going to use the model here. Now, we're not going to use exactly the same words. She begins with the adverbial of time last month. We're going to begin with an adverbial. So, last night, I was sat at my kitchen table. Now, why I like the domestic anecdotes is they're the most kind of like, we can literally in lockdown, can't we, look around, we are in a domestic setting. So we can quite easily connect to a domestic anecdote. Last night, I was sat at my kitchen. Yeah. Yesterday, I was finishing yet another Zoom call. Now, I'm actually going to use the ellipsis because it could then lead into something else. So that's what we mean by the domestic. So your job, in a minute, I don't want you to do it yet because I'm going to say stop and off you go, is going to be to create your own examples of anecdotes under each of these headings and to do a little bit of research, which I'll explain in a minute. So we've got the domestic anecdote. Last night, I was sat at my kitchen. Yesterday, I was finishing yet another Zoom call. Every year, my family and I go to. So a domestic anecdote, a story that's from your personal or home life. Yep. Now, professional anecdotes. These are the harder ones because you have to fake it. You are not professional people. Now, when we're faking it, or we're adopting the persona of somebody that might have a professional background, so we're not faking it, we're adopting a persona. That's where you can use the examples we look at. Last month, I attended an international academic conference. Now, the problem with adopting a persona, it's harder to maintain an authentic voice. If you try and write an essay where you're in the persona of a female academic, a university lecturer, that's much harder to maintain. So the domestic anecdote is always, for me, a way into using anecdote, but it's easier to be authentic in. You know, last night I was finishing yet another Zoom call. Yesterday, I mean, the easiest ones, now this is, I thank my dad for this, because every time I see my dad, he says this, Amy, yesterday I was listening to the radio. Or Amy, a man on the radio said, my dad listens to the radio a lot, but actually it gives a really nice domestic anecdote. Yesterday, I was listening to the radio when Katie Edwards, Dr. Katie Edwards, was being interviewed about her strong belief that people continue to discriminate against her because of how she speaks. Now, as I listened to her, there was a small part of me that thought, I can understand that, Northerner. But then I realised that I was guilty of the same discrimination that she was looking to challenge. And it was time for me to think about my own prejudices and where they came from. Now, guys, that was me winging it. Now, I have the lovely sense of years of experience, so winging it for me might seem unfair, but that's what you're going to have time for, to create a domestic anecdote. Now, with these, try a few on for size. It's like try a last night I was at my kitchen, try a yesterday. I mean, think as well what you do. So if you're on social media a lot, use that. Yesterday, I was scrolling through social media when. Yep. Yesterday, my phone or my notifications from Twitter wouldn't stop pinging. What was causing all the furrow, I asked myself. When I checked in with Twitter, Katie Edwards, I keep going to her because she's the name of one of our writers that I remember. Katie Edwards was being interviewed, or Katie Edwards being retweeted for making a very bold claim that she had been a victim of discrimination. What for, you ask? Her accent. So, hello, just doing a little bit of the verbal kind of play. That's why I like the creativity. You get to play. So you are going to create one, as a minimum, domestic anecdotes, just starting sentences, not the whole thing. You might make two just to play with it. Now, if you want then the professional ones. So professional means, like she's done, I was attending an international academic conference. So that wouldn't necessarily be yesterday. So we need a little bit of time between doing the professional thing. So we could say, okay, last month, now I attended, now I'm a teacher. Okay, so it's easy for me. I've got like more of a professional vocabulary than you. So last month I attended teacher training conference. Now, why am I zooming in on teacher training? Not just because I'm a teacher, but we saw in the Chilu article, didn't we, that teachers were coming under pressure to do what? Change their accents. So that might give me a way in. So I am holding in my head beautiful shiny threads of information from the articles that I've read. Now, that is, again, a skill I've mastered and learned over time. But it's a skill I want to talk to you about as I'm doing this, because this is what I want you to understand. The more you read, the more articles you engage with, the more you return to the articles we read, the more threads will start to kind of come into your way of thinking. So last month, I attended a teacher training conference. Now, all jobs kind of have at some point kind of like professional development. So we could say, at work, we were invited to attend a professional development session that included advice on changing our local, where are we from? Plymothian accents. Oh, controversial. I'm at work and they're telling me I can't speak Jana, but I'm making up my professional kind of anecdote. Now, really, some of these then start to overlap. So historical means you can go back in time. So far, I've kind of stayed within a time frame of last night, yesterday, last month. Why? Because really, when we're thinking about journalism, there is that sense of immediacy and relevancy, making what you're writing about relevant and significant, that comes from it being present tense. This is happening now. This is an issue now. This is something that we should be aware of now. So often the domestic and professional anecdotes need to have that quite short time frame. So we're writing within a now moment, okay? Or at least within, say, the past 6 months. That would make it relevant, okay? However, we recognize that there are historical ideas, okay, that we could go back a little bit further. Now, for me, that's easy because I'm older than you. So I could say something like, Okay, now this is what we mean, and this is a bit like what Katie Edwards did to a bit. Oh no, she's last month. She talks about, she does go back in time to when she was training at university and also got people mocking her. So that's what we would call the historical anecdote, where she takes us back through her history and those historical experiences of discrimination. So things like as a student, that would be a signifier that I've gone historical. Last month I'm working as a teacher, or I've celebrated 20 years in teaching. As a student, yeah, so I could say something like, as a student, now this is true, this is a true historical anecdote. As a student, I found myself studying in Cardiff, and very quickly my accent had changed. And that's true. When I went as a student, my accent did change. So as a student, I found myself studying in Cardiff, and very quickly my accent changed. However, after 3 years, actually, I'm lying. I was a student many more than 3 years ago. So, only 3 years. After 20 years, nothing remains of my Welsh twang. And it never occurred to me that this was. Now I'm actually thinking like a journalist. So I'm starting to develop the idea in my head, but actually it's just, I've linked it to accent. And actually this could take us into somebody like Giles, adapting how we speak in order to fit in. Because it's absolutely true. In our, not infancy, but in our youth, okay, we've mentioned this in class, we talked about socio-linguistic maturation, that we are much more susceptible to change, and our accents do adapt very quickly to external changes because we want to fit in. Once we reach, they used to say socio-linguistic maturity was in line with kind of like coming out of adolescence at about 21, our accent becomes more fixed. So there is a natural phenomenon of change. There are natural circumstances, life circumstances, that mean we are more likely to change. So really, I think for me, it's like we started to talk about last lesson. My problem is, and this is where I do agree with Katie Edwards, it's when the external pressure to change is tied in with the wrong motives. I think that's it. I should write that down because I'll always forget that thought. For me, my problem with change is when people are put under pressure to change because with wrong motive, i.e. you won't get the job. If you don't change your accent, people will think you're thick. If you speak that way, your children will suffer. We have some really strong external rhetoric and kind of like ways of persuading people to change that I think are really dangerous. That's what I'm against. Change because you want to change. Change because you moved to Cardiff and you can't help but pick up the accent, like the sound of the city that you're living in and immersed in for 3 years. It's going to happen. Think carefully about where you choose for your university cities if you're accent shy, because there's a good chance you might change. So it's okay to change if my motives are pure, or if my motives are my own, if I'm in control of myself, if I'm exercising self-control, I choose to change. I want to change. If it becomes tied with the language of I have to change, then I'm with Katie Edwards. Shut your face. That's wrong. Don't tell people that. So this is what anecdotes do and look like. So again, we've got domestic, really that's about being at home. Professional, being in the workplace. Historical, now contemporary did disappear. It was there a minute ago. Now I'm not going to lie, contemporary is just use an up-to-date story. So contemporary means use something that's happening now. So it really would be both the domestic and the professional example again, because they are contemporary examples right now. But if we wanted a slightly different one, so we could say right now, there is, so right now there continues to be a prevalent belief that certain accents or certain accents are better than others. I know this because, now I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to go ... No, but I know this because. So you can say right now there continues to be a prevalent belief that certain accents are better than others. I know this because somebody mocked me for my Jana accent. I know this because I was advised in staff training to tone down my Plymothian twang. I know this because students told me that they didn't think I was, they didn't realize I was going to be as clever as I was because I spoke funny. Things like that. So contemporary really is about use a right now story. Use a story that reflects something that is happening now. So what you can do, I'm just going to make that big, okay, is you can pause now and you can give yourself about 10 minutes, 15 minutes to try and play with these ideas of creating the different types of anecdotal settings, a domestic anecdote, a professional anecdote, a historical, a contemporary. You can look back over the articles to help you. You can be creative. Now, we know eventually we're going to be taking these back to our tenor, to our main idea of accents and speech. So if you can link it to your own experiences, thinking of us, we're in Cornwall, we're in a Cornish school. So Cornish accents, Jana accents. You can go for the reverse. Yeah. Right now, in Torpoint, people still point me out for speaking without a Cornish accent. Aren't you proud of where you're from, they say? Wait a minute, I say. I am proud of being Cornish, but I also speak the way I want to. So you could do something like that. Okay, so you can pause now and do that and then come back for the research task, or you can stay listening and I'm going to go into the research task next, okay? Okay, guys, so the other task that you've got are research tasks. Now, I'm just going to see if I can move that because it's kind of going over there. Now I'm in the middle. Okay, so for the dramatization, remember that's where we tell someone else's story, real world events. Now, really, I've said you can reread the key articles we've used and intentionally choose someone else's story to tell. You can magpie. So I've been magpieing all evening, all lesson, Katie Edwards. Katie Edwards. I heard Katie Edwards on the radio. I was reading an article by Katie Edwards. Katie Edwards, Katie Edwards. That's me magpieing her story to tell. So your job is to rescan through the key articles and make a note of name and or event. So actually double check with the article the information about the teaching. Trainee teachers. You could even Google, were trainee teachers really told to lose their accents? So you can use the articles we've already got as a springboard into finding out someone else's story and a real world event. That's number one. Then popping over here to popular culture. Your job is to research some examples of icons and celebrities who have changed the way they speak their accent. Who are they? What reasons have they given for change? And what have they changed from and to? Now, again, if you think right back to some of our earlier lessons, we've already got some celebrities, some icons that we could talk about. The Beckhams, Prince William, Kate Middleton, Prince Harry. So you can go back and that could be your research, going back to those notes. They would all qualify as popular culture references. Or you can widen your research. It's quite interesting. There is a celebrity called Mark Wright. Now, you might be far too young to know The Only Way is Essex. Now, Mark Wright's really interesting because he actually did quite a well-received interview where he actually talked quite openly. He was looking to break America. He didn't want to continue to work in England. He wanted to almost break away from that stereotype of the Essex boy. But he was actually categorically told by his agent that if he wanted work in America, he would have to have elocution lessons. He would have to modify his speech. So he's a really interesting one, Mark Wright. So, or you could go broader. You could simply Google which celebrities and icons have changed the way they speak and just see what that yields. But if you find it's too much and you want the focus, have a look again at the Beckhams, the royal family, or Mark Wright's quite interesting as well. So that's your popular culture bit of research. Now, your high culture reference. Okay, now you might find this that you know it already. Somebody in your house might know it, or the magic of Google. Now, which Shakespeare character famously mocks his master for teaching him his language? And now he's going to use it to curse him. So, guys, that's your research task. It's going to take you the rest of the lesson. We will share our research when we come back live together next lesson. We'll use that as our kind of springboard point into the live teaching when we're together. So reread the articles. What are you going to magpie? What are you going to steal from the articles we've read? Katie Edwards. Look at the Beckhams, look at the royal family, find out about Mark Wright. Okay, they're all examples of popular celebrities who've changed their accents, the way they speak. Think, though, what are the reasons they've changed? What have they changed from and to? Do they speak about their changes? Okay, and which Shakespeare character famously mocks his master for teaching him his language, and now he will use it to curse him? Okay, because that might give us a high reference point. So, lovely people, get going with your research and your anecdotes, and I look forward to hearing your anecdotes and your research when we're live next lesson. Bye.